Welcome all to our Emerging Issues webinar. Our presentation today is titled Connected Chaos, Disruptive Cyber Events and Their Collateral Damage. And I'm psyched to see so many of you on the call with us today. I'm your host, Andy Blanchard, and I lead our Emerging Issues team here at Verisk. As always, I will begin with our policy statement. Someone could advance that slide, please. I should know it by heart, but I'm going to still need to see the words in front of me. Here we are. The policy of Verisk Analytics and subsidiary companies is to comply in all respects with federal and state antitrust laws. With this in mind, we want to mention that during all seminars held under our auspices, this policy prohibits discussion of certain topics. Because we want to avoid even the appearance of an antitrust violation, we go beyond the letter of the law, and we will not discuss any matter that violates the spirit of the antitrust laws or could be perceived as doing so. A copy of our policy statement on discussion at meetings can be found at verisk.com/statement. And with us on the call is Verisk attorney, Jason Kurtz. Jason, would you like to offer any guidance before we kick off the agenda here?
Sure, thank you. Good morning. Yes, typically legal also just likes to add this quick reminder, and that is that we ask participants today to please not discuss the specific corporate policies or intentions of any insurers in the property and casualty industry, including those of their own company or of any of their competitors. Rather, we welcome and encourage participants to share their own professional opinions and insights on the issues we will discuss during our call today. I will be available to answer any questions anyone may have regarding our antitrust policy, and I will interject during the call should, for whatever reason, we get off track in relation to our related policy. That's all I have.
All right, thank you, Jason. So 2 quick points before we get into the meat of the agenda here. First, keep the questions coming in as always. Your feedback, your questions, super valuable to us at Verisk, but also valuable to those listening in. I guarantee if you have a question, there's somebody out there with a similar question. So fire away at us. Only we here can see those questions in the chat. So no worries about anybody else seeing what you put up there. If we can't get to your question during the webinar, we always endeavor to do so afterwards. And the second point, we also publish the written responses to your questions on our site, and we are recording today's webinar and intend to publish that as well. So just go to our homepage. If you scroll down, there's a part that says Emerging Issues Webinars on Demand, and it's all right there. The slides from today's deck, the live recordings, and the Q&A. So if someone could advance the slide because my mouse is not doing it. That's what happens during live events. Sometimes, there we go. All right. So as mentioned earlier, we're going to do a deep dive in disruptive cyber events and their collateral damage. We've got 5 Verisk subject matter experts coming your way. We'll be introducing them in a minute. And since it's almost October, we've got a poll for you. It's not a political poll, no worries there, but we do want to ask you just a quick poll if you wouldn't mind. Question is, when considering the landscape of cyber risk, what concerns you the most? A, state-sponsored cyber attacks against critical infrastructure. B, cybercrime against businesses. C, cybercrime against individuals. Or D, non-malicious incidents. I will give a few seconds for everyone to complete their poll. Don't worry, there's no right or wrong answers. No one's getting graded. There won't be a midterm. All right, I think we probably have enough time to get our polling results up, although it says organizers from panels don't vote. So I'm not sure if this is not working. Oh, it is working. There we go. So it looks like the one that got the most votes is state-sponsored cyber attacks against critical infrastructure. Not totally surprised to see that. That's something that actually our cyber team is working on right now. We've been giving that a lot of thought about widespread cyber events. So thank you for participating in the poll. And with that, we can jump right ahead. I'm going to be passing the mic to our first speaker, Catherine Lynch. Catherine is a data analyst on our emerging issues team, and she's going to be taking a quantified look at cyber risks. There's the slide. Catherine, please take it away.
Thanks, Andy. Hi, everyone. I'm going to be speaking about some recent trends in cyber attacks and the rise of non-malicious cyber incidents, and set the table a little bit for our next few speakers. Due to a number of high-profile cyber attacks this year, anecdotally at least, it may not be surprising that cybercrime is on the rise, but we also have data that shows how cybercrimes are causing more chaos. One indicator that we have is data from the FBI that tracks the number of cybercrime complaints and financial losses the agency receives on an annual basis. The chart here shows these complaints and losses that the FBI has received over the past 5 years. And as you can see, both these indicators reached new highs in 2023. Losses from cybercrimes have grown every year since 2020, and the FBI received more than 880,000 complaints last year. In total, all these complaints equal $12.5 billion in losses for victims, according to the FBI. So what's driving these losses? Well, phishing, personal data breaches, and extortion are the most common cybercrimes that we may all be familiar with. They are not the crimes that cause the largest losses on aggregate for victims. Instead, investment scams, business email compromise scams, and tech support crimes cause the largest losses on aggregate for victims. Investment scams include deceptive practices that induce investors to make purchases based on false information. The popularity of cryptocurrencies and the prevalence of scams there have led to large losses for victims. Business email compromise scams, which is where scammers spoof known email accounts to conduct unauthorized transfer of funds or other harmful actions, inflict large losses. And tech support crimes, which is where criminals pose as technical or customer support representatives, can also cause large losses. The loss amounts reported to the FBI from each of these crimes have grown year over year since 2020. However, as mentioned on my first slide, these losses from cybercrime are likely very underreported. While the FBI estimates losses from cybercrime near $12.5 billion in 2023, another widely referenced estimate put the cost of cybercrime closer to $8 trillion, which is quite a large jump. Looking just at ransomware, one source estimates that $1.1 billion alone was paid in ransoms in 2023, and another source estimates that data breaches, on average, cost organizations $4.9 million in 2024. These numbers may seem rather broad, so I think here it's worth taking a step back and evaluating what goes into some of these estimates. On the right here, I've listed some consequences of cybercrime that can cause large losses for companies that experience these events. These consequences include loss of revenue, the cost to restore hacked systems, the cost of a forensic investigation, and any potential regulatory fines. These drivers are what go into some of these cybercrime loss numbers. However, these consequences, especially reputational harm, lost data, and business disruption, aren't unique to just cybercrimes that are carried out by malicious actors. These consequences can also arise as the result of cyber incidents that are caused by non-malicious employees and contractors, which brings me to my next slide. Non-malicious cyber incidents are incidents that are carried out by either negligent, mistaken, or outsmarted insiders. And an insider is defined as anyone who has access or knowledge of an organization's computer networks and systems. The recent meltdown of a widely used security system that took down computers, airline, and healthcare networks across the US is just one example. However, a number of healthcare, financial, and telecommunication companies have also experienced outages and data breaches caused by non-malicious employees or vendors. Many of the factors that increase the likelihood of cybercrime that some of our speakers will be discussing later on also apply to non-malicious incidents. In a review of insider incidents, which on average cost organizations $16.2 million in 2023, negligent and mistaken insiders were responsible for 55% of these incidents. Malicious insiders were only responsible for 25% of incidents. And a separate survey found that non-malicious insiders were involved in 68% of all data breaches. And now I'll be turning it over to Kimberly, who will be diving deeper into some of these topics. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm going to talk about some of the collateral damage from recent cyber events. Let's consider two events in 2024 that show that cyber events are increasingly spreading disruption far beyond their initial impact. First, a healthcare technology firm that supported billing and care authorization portals. They discovered intruders in their system and shut down their network to isolate the intruders. 99% of their pharmacy network services were restored in approximately 2 weeks after they shut down their network. Electronic payments platform was restored in approximately 3.5 weeks, and their medical claims preparation software was restored in approximately a month. At that time, when this was restored, claims worth more than $14 billion in charges were staged for processing. Now, the impacts as a result of the inability to process medical claims and authorizations were prescription backlogs, because customers were forced to decide whether they needed their prescription at retail cost or they should wait for the system to be back working because they couldn't make the insurance adjustments to the cost. There were delayed medical care, additionally, as a result of the inability to determine whether a procedure was approved by health insurance and what the cost would be to the patient. And then also missed or delayed revenue to medical practices, which really strained their financial viability. This was so severe that in response, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services made available accelerated and advanced payments to those medical practices experiencing claims disruptions. The second event was a cybersecurity technology firm which provides endpoint detection and response software, which included an error in a software update that caused Windows operating systems to crash. Endpoint detection and response software is a software that continuously runs on each workstation, so each computer, and monitors for abnormal behavior that indicates a malicious cyber incident. The issue with the software update was discovered within hours, and solutions were provided also within this very short period of time. However, to correct the issue, each computer needed to be manually rebooted in safe mode and to have that problematic update deleted. There were two paths, basically two paths to do this. One is to have the administrative privileges for each individual device, log on with those, reboot it in safe mode, and change the system. The second path was if the computer used BitLocker full disk encryption, which is strongly recommended for security purposes, in order to do that safe mode reboot and delete the software update, you needed to have the BitLocker recovery keys, which are specific to the computer. As a result, this made the fix easy but time intensive because you couldn't do it to a system. You had to do the fix for each individual computer. This update impacted approximately 8.5 million devices running Windows operating systems. Now, as a result of this software update, the impacts were to a variety of industries. Airlines, there were flight cancellations and extensive delays. Healthcare systems had varying impact depending on which computers used the software. 911 services, at least 7 states reported temporary outages. There were shipping delays because the computer systems that they rely on were not working. Public transport had scheduling and route planning impacted. Government agencies suffered processing delays and some closures. Certain banks had the inability to access accounts and process transactions. And it's also worth noting that some entities were impacted or even had a more extensive impact because their partner services were impacted. So maybe they weren't using a Windows computer, but their partner who allows them to run their business was, and so they couldn't provide that service. Okay, certain factors may influence the impact of a cyber event. I'm going to generally discuss 3 factors, but keep in mind that these factors involve some overlapping concepts and may not be every factor. The first is business continuity and operational resiliency plans. Business continuity plans are designed to maintain important business operations during an emergency. So examples of this could include components such as backup servers, backup data, and employee training for responding to emergencies. Operational resiliency plans are when business operations are designed or planned, considering how they will identify, respond to, and recover from stressors such as cyber events. So examples of this include determining which systems or vendors to use based on how they will be impacted during a cyber event scenario, and also considering the interplay of different systems and vendors to ensure that you don't have too much concentrated reliance on one vendor or one software. The second factor is cyber supply chain and vendor management. Some components of this are, first, to identify and understand the risks. Some things to consider is that there is definitely an increased dependency on vendors. This could include both direct vendors and then potentially multiple layers of vendors throughout the supply chain. Additionally, different vendors may present different amounts of risk depending on the role they play to a business's operations. The second component is to set expectations with suppliers and vendors and then audit them for compliance with the expectations. Another component is to specifically look at contract terms, such as insurance requirements, which could be both minimum limits, certain types of coverage that they will hold, whether or not anyone is required to be listed as an additional insured. This could also include required cybersecurity practices or incident response protocols, and also being cognizant that certain contracts include limitations of liability, and to make sure that you understand what those are and how they would impact your company in the event that there is a cyber event. Another component is to consider that a cyber event could impact your cyber functions or other functions. So a vendor may have a cyber event in their entity, but it doesn't impact your entity as a cyber event. However, it stops them from being able to provide you with some component that you need for your business, so that there could be jumping back and forth between cyber impacts and non-cyber impacts. And then the last component of this is to make sure that it's a continual process, that you monitor how this is working and make improvements as necessary. The third factor to consider is cybersecurity and event disclosures. The Securities and Exchange Commission has rules requiring registrants to, first, disclose material cybersecurity incidents that they experience. It's worth noting that these rules are still relatively new, so it's not clear whether these would apply to accidental outages. The second rule is to disclose on an annual basis material information regarding cybersecurity risk management, strategy, and governance. This requires a description of the board's role in oversight and requires a description of management's role in assessing and managing material risks from cybersecurity threats. Any disclosure that's made inherently creates an obligation to ensure that it is both accurate and adequate. While these disclosures may not directly influence the impact of a cyber event on the individual entity or others, these can impact potential claims or litigation post cyber event. After a cyber event, claims or litigation could include these potential theories of liability. These aren't meant to be exhaustive, just some potentials. First, breach of contract or professional negligence. If the cyber event was directly caused by the product or services of a third party, an impacted party could argue breach of contract or professional negligence. The professional service at issue could include making recommendations for products to use or processes to follow. It could also include making an evaluation of an entity's products or processes. Professional negligence generally only applies to the parties to the professional relationship. So consider a client and a professional. Often, any obligation does not extend to any other entities impacted outside of that relationship. Breach of contract also typically only applies to the parties to the contract, and potentially at play could be contractual limitations of liability. Another theory of liability is negligent oversight. If the cyber event was caused by a vendor or part of the cyber supply chain and impacted a company, an allegation could be that the company management failed to adequately oversee vendors and suppliers. Alternatively, if a company was unable to navigate a cyber event, particularly when other impacted companies were able to, there could be allegations that the company management failed to adequately oversee business continuity and operational resiliency plans. Third, misleading or inaccurate statements. These allegations could include misleading or inaccurate statements by a third party about a product or service that resulted in or changed the outcome of a cyber event. So an example could be a vendor who states that they always use multi-factor authentication, but they don't actually require it, and the lack of multi-factor authentication contributes to a cyber event. Another way that this could be alleged is that there could be misleading or accurate statements by the company itself about their own systems and processes for vendor or supplier management, cybersecurity, or business continuity and operational resilience plans. The last theory of liability is failure to disclose or adequately disclose cyber events. These allegations could be made against a vendor or supplier whose cyber event impacts a company, or against a company itself by their shareholders or investors or customers. Various insurance policies may respond to cyber events. This list, again, is not meant to be exhaustive, just to highlight a couple. First, cyber insurance. Cyber insurance generally provides coverage for malicious cyber events and may potentially provide coverage for accidental cyber events. Another key component of this coverage is it generally extends to the entity or individual directly impacted by the cyber event, and not those indirectly impacted. Now, there could potentially be coverage for contingent impacts to other entities or individuals, depending on the specific terms of the policy. Another type of insurance that may respond is technology errors and omissions insurance. This coverage generally extends to allegations of software or services that didn't perform as promised or as they should have. directors and officers insurance may provide coverage for a company's oversight of its own cybersecurity, business continuity, and operational resiliency plans, and the accuracy and adequacy of any disclosures. It may also provide coverage for oversight of vendor management and cyber supply chain. And I wanted to mention that there could be other insurance that may apply depending on the specific scenario and how the impacts go through. So an example could be a cyber outage results in flight cancellations and delays. So travel insurance or travel interruption insurance comes into play for those resulting impacts. And now my colleague, Kevin Sullivan from our emerging issues team is going to talk about auto cybersecurity.
Thanks, Kimberly. So now that my colleagues have taken us through some of the high-level trends in cyber attacks and non-malicious cyber events, in addition to the potential collateral knock-on effects that they could invite, as Kimberly just discussed, I'd like to provide a sort of cybersecurity case study on connected automobiles and electric vehicle infrastructure. I'm sure many of you are familiar with connected vehicle technology from its perhaps more practical origins in the late 1990s when General Motors released its OnStar services to today's varieties of connectivity, which can do everything from shuffle your favorite playlist to turning your house lights and air conditioner on as you roll into the driveway. This functionality has become ubiquitous in more recent years across all makes and models of automobile. According to one report, connected vehicles accounted for more than 40% of new car sales worldwide in 2020. The United States has led the pack on this trend, with connected autos accounting for approximately 90% of new auto sales that same year. And according to one report, that number is anticipated to balloon by 2030, with 95% of vehicles sold globally expected to be connected. And aside from the connected creature comforts mentioned earlier, there is reason to believe that connected automobiles indeed make us safer. According to the US Department of Transportation, connected vehicles featuring so-called vehicle-to-everything functionality, or V2X, they could potentially address approximately 80% of the crash scenarios involving non-impaired drivers on US roads. Now, this technology allows vehicles to communicate with other cars on the road, with pedestrians, either through signals transmitted through phones or wearable devices, and even with roadway infrastructure, such as streetlights, cameras, signage, even lane markers. And though this ever-increasing transition to connected cars and smart mobility services may indeed result in safer roads, there is a growing body of evidence to suggest that it has also created conditions for greater cybersecurity risk. According to one report, publicly disclosed auto cyber incidents in fact increased by over 50% between 2019 and 2023. These potential vulnerabilities have been identified by researchers in recent years across the entire digital auto ecosystem. Now, this includes within the vehicle vehicle services like infotainment systems and telematics, in manufacturer back-end services like vehicle door control, in third-party apps such as popular ride-sharing services, within enterprise technology such as cloud services, and even in auto manufacturing plants. Cyber attacks on this automotive ecosystem can subsequently lead to business disruptions, data breaches, fraud, vehicle theft, and more. The incidence of fraud alone, for example, increased from 4% to 20% between 2022 and 2023, according to one analysis. These incidents not only affect the manufacturers, but also the end users, leading to potential safety risk and financial losses, in addition to potential reputational damage for manufacturers and the companies that support the connected car supply chain. This brings us to the potential attack vectors in today's connected automobiles. Modern automobiles include an increasingly complex web of telematics, application program interfaces or APIs, and software-defined architectures. The illustration here, produced by the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, demonstrates the many potential attack vectors in today's automobiles. While I won't go through all of these vulnerabilities now, potential cyber threats include the infiltration of infotainment systems, which can be exploited by hackers using malware to infiltrate a system and then moving laterally to critical car functions like brakes and steering control, through telematics control units, which serve as sort of a connecting point between the vehicle and the outside world, and can potentially be exploited by hackers to issue, for instance, engine disabling commands. Perhaps even via tire sensors, which could allow cyber criminals to track vehicles and to alter readings that might cause vehicle warning lights to activate, or to even crash the car's electronic control unit entirely. According to one assessment, remote attacks accounted for 95% of all cyber attacks on vehicles. One notable example of this method is the 2016 attack on Tesla's Model S, where researchers were able to remotely control the vehicle's braking system by hijacking the car's controller area network, or CAN bus, which connects various electronic control units in a vehicle. Over-the-air updates, or OTA, which allow auto manufacturers to remotely deliver software and firmware updates to vehicles, also present a very particular vector. While OTA updates can, according to analysts, improve security by ensuring that the so-called Internet of Things devices in our cars, like the telematics, also GPS trackers and infotainment systems, remain up to date, they may also allow hackers to trick devices into communication with malicious servers, or even replace intended file updates with malware. The decision by automakers to increasingly introduce subscription services for everything from heated seats to hands-free driving on highways, all of which may require regular software updates, could create more opportunities for cyber exploitation as well. Indeed, according to one study, telematics and application servers, infotainment systems, and APIs accounted for the largest number of auto cyber incidents in 2023. Now, these vulnerabilities can extend beyond our vehicles and across the entire automobile infrastructure, as we will discuss next. Now, there's of course a tremendous amount of overlap between the potential vulnerabilities in both connected cars and electric vehicles. EVs naturally include many, if not most, of the same telematics features, for example, but also include some OTA connected features that are unique to EVs, such as battery power maintenance, regenerative braking management, and bidirectional charging support, which allows an electric vehicle to supply energy back to the electrical grid. It's this last point on EV charging infrastructure that I'd like to home in on here. Cyber attacks on EV charging infrastructure have greatly increased in recent years, according to reports, suggesting a number of possible security vulnerabilities. Charging station hacks have the ability to display inappropriate content, access personal data, distribute malware, and disrupt critical functions through denial of service attacks, or DOS. These hacks could also serve as a springboard for penetrating and disrupting electrical grids. Attackers could, for example, use malware in charging stations to delay charging until a moment when multiple cars are online, putting so much demand on the grid that it would crash. Recent research also indicates that attackers could interfere with EV operability and access personal data via charging ports. Moreover, attackers could decrease battery capacity by up to 50%, this according to one recent study. Briefly here, we have a graphic visualization of the EV Extreme Fast Charging ecosystem, which is provided by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. This connectivity demonstrates an interdependency of data and power between the vehicle, the charging station, third-party cloud services, and the electrical grid, which creates a variety of remote opportunities for would-be malicious actors. And this threat may reach beyond personal automobiles, as we're going to discuss next. I'm going to pivot for just a minute here to commercial shipping and trucking. In 2017, the Federal Motor Carrier Service Administration mandated that all commercial truck operators convert to ELDs, electronic logging devices that allow truck operators to collect information such as time on the road, braking habits, all of which is mandated by federal law. In 2020, the FBI issued a bulletin warning that cyber criminals could potentially exploit these new electronic devices, citing supposed insufficient cybersecurity measures on the part of the manufacturers and suppliers. And indeed, according to a 2023 report, cyber attacks in general increased by 700% across industry supply chains since the ELD logging devices were mandated. And much like with personal automobiles, such attacks can endanger the lives of the driver and other drivers on the road around them and can affect business operations. In 2023, a ransomware attack targeting a vendor that supported one support company's ELDs prevented the company from logging their hours and other essential data. The attack disrupted business operations for 3 weeks and required the impacted carrier to seek special permission from federal regulators to use paper logbooks and phones to log their vital data. And a report published this year by researchers at Colorado State University revealed that hackers could potentially inject self-replicating worm malware into ELDs capable of disrupting a truck's functionality. These attacks could be carried out at truck stops, ports, rest stops, and potentially be disseminated via Bluetooth or over Wi-Fi. These worms can furthermore lie dormant until a certain point, for instance, when infections spread across a specific number of devices, and then finally strike. And they can also be deployed remotely via a drive-by attack, as these researchers in fact conducted, which allowed them to take control of the car and in fact the truck, and to slow it down. And real briefly here, while both connected and electric vehicle technology pose a number of potential risks, industry experts and analysts have provided some tips in more recent years to both individuals and business owners on how they can better protect their vehicles. For instance, in the terms of connected cars, implementing intrusion detection systems, or IDS, for instance, can help monitor network traffic for suspicious activities and potential threats. These devices, these tools allow customers and users to analyze patterns and anomalies and detect an alert of potential cyber attacks, allowing for intervention. Other measures, such as multi-factor authentication, can help verify access to telematics, and the encryption of OTA firmware updates could help fortify connected cars against greater cyber incident. All this information coming from the US Department of Energy. In the case of electric vehicles, analysts believe that the continued and increased use of encryption protocols can help protect data transmitted between EVs and public charging stations. And also verification tools such as public key infrastructure and code signing could be a valuable asset. In the terms of commercial trucking, a greater diversity of ELD devices and the elimination of unnecessary API features, in addition to the increased use of high entropy passwords, have been recommended by researchers to help prevent truckers from getting attacked. On that note, I'm going to pass the mic over to my colleague, Greg Scobletti. Greg?
Great, thank you, Kevin. So appreciate that case study. What I'm going to talk about now are accelerants. So these are basically trends or factors that might be influencing the frequency or severity of cyber incidents. We have 4 that we can highlight for you here today. I want to start with concentration. So in network engineering, there's this concept called a single point of failure, and it refers to a node or an element of a network that, if it fails, it can take down other parts of the network with it. I think it's a good metaphor for concentration risk, because what applies to networks might also apply more broadly to things like vendors and even to economic markets. So let's take vendors first. I think we've heard today, particularly from Kimberly, right, how certain systemic vendors, when they suffer disruption, they can have a significant downstream consequence. Their disruption can radiate out to their clients, their partners, a lot of downstream entities. And this is why supply chain cyber attacks in particular have become so powerful and so popular. So a supply chain attack, very briefly, it refers to a type of cyber attack that targets a specific important vendor that may be embedded across a number of different industries or a number of different companies. So rather than go out and try to compromise all those individual companies, you just target this one critical piece of technology that's used by all those companies, and then by extension, you gain entrance into their systems as well. And you can see here on the slide, one particularly popular example of a supply chain attack involved a file transfer software. So hackers were able to compromise it, and then by extension, they were able to breach over 600 different organizations, leveraging just that single attack. But we can also think of concentration more broadly as impacting our economic environment as well. So consider the broader trend of market consolidation, fewer vendors serving more customers. There was a paper in 2020 in the Journal of Cyber Policy that noted that market concentration, this increase of just single vendors serving multiple markets, may actually be increasing systemic vulnerability to cyber risk. I think we see this potentially very clearly in cloud computing, right, where there are just 3 entities that reportedly control around 2/3 of the world's cloud computing infrastructure. So if one of those firms happens to experience a disruption, whether it's malicious or not, it can have very broad consequences. So in 2021, for example, a leading cloud provider experienced an outage, and that disruption spread rapidly. It interfered with e-commerce deliveries, interfered with food deliveries, smart home devices like robotic vacuum cleaners went offline, online test services went down, among a host of other disruptions. And these data center outages can be very costly. So there was a 2023 survey that suggested that the average cost of a data center outage in 2023 was over $100,000, and 16% of all businesses reported suffering an outage that cost them over $1 million last year. That's an example of how this concentration may be accelerating our risk environment. And then there's social engineering. Now, this is kind of a fixture of the cyber risk environment in its own right, but in the context here, we're talking about how social engineering may also play a role in magnifying the impact of an existing cyber event. So a good example of this, I think, happened over the summer. We saw a major platform that was used by automotive dealers that got hacked. And shortly after that auto dealer platform was compromised, auto dealers reported receiving phishing messages that were masquerading as tech support for the compromised vendor. So these kinds of follow-on social engineering attacks basically take advantage of the confusion that might be surrounding an event where people might be naturally looking for help. And there's actually evidence in the literature that suggests that people's email habits, their wariness to opening suspicious email, actually declines following a catastrophic event or following a massive disruptive event. In other words, people might be more susceptible to opening emails that they otherwise would have marked as spam following these kinds of disruptive events. These kind of follow-on phishing attacks also benefit from the existence of dark web phishing as a service organizations. These are basically shadowy groups that enable attackers to stand up a phishing attack very quickly with little pre-existing technical expertise. So it basically enables hackers who may not even be affiliated with an initial cyber incident to capitalize on that incident by rapidly standing up phishing attacks that aim to exploit it. The other accelerant I want to talk about is geopolitical tensions. So we know that state actors may be behind cyber attacks. And as you can see here, there have been over 800 such attacks attributed to state actors since around 2005. That's according to a database maintained by the Council on Foreign Relations. Now, one reason that state actors may be an accelerant of cyber risk is obviously because they have a lot of resources. They have a lot of technological expertise. And when they launch cyber attacks, they can be extremely disruptive. And history has shown that at least some of these attacks have a tendency to spill over out into other targets, non-geopolitical targets. So I think we saw this most infamously with the NotPetya malware that was launched several years ago, reportedly launched by one nation against the interests of another, but it wound up spilling out into other industries and into other nations that weren't necessarily a party to that geopolitical dispute. And another reason that state actors may be such a potent force accelerating cyber risk is the ability to manipulate hardware and software, to make hardware and software vulnerable before it's even shipped out into corporate or individual end users. So, for example, in 2020, the US accused a Chinese-based vendor of mobile networking equipment of covertly building and accessing network backdoors that would facilitate eavesdropping. We see a set of similar allegations actually just launched this week surrounding connected car software, and worries that nation state actors may be compromising that software before it would reach US end users. And finally, there's artificial intelligence. And obviously this is a huge issue in the world of cybersecurity. I just want to focus on a couple of narrower angles here, and let's start with this social engineering and the role that AI may play here. So generative AI in particular may be helping to facilitate the spread of phishing attacks following significant cyber incidents in a couple of ways. So first, it can help hackers create more compelling phishing messages. There was a study actually published this year that suggests when hackers use generative AI to write their phishing emails, they actually proved to be more persuasive than when human writers or human authors created those phishing emails. So Gen AI phishing emails may be more persuasive. Generative AI may also be used to scale and automate and even personalize phishing campaigns for greater potential impact. Pretty sure we've all heard the term deepfake by now, right? Artificial representations of real people. Deepfakes are rapidly becoming a tool of choice for scammers and social engineers. There's a famous case out of Hong Kong earlier this year where an individual received a video call from a deepfake impersonation of their company's chief financial officer that resulted in the theft of $25 million. This seems to be the largest amount publicly reported for a deepfake scam so far, but a study published this year by Deloitte suggested that generative AI could actually be responsible for driving fraud losses as high as $40 billion by the year 2027. So really a potentially market acceleration of cyber risk here, driven potentially by AI. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Laura Panesso from our Government Relations Department. She's going to provide an update on some of the latest legislative and regulatory trends that we've been seeing. Laura?
Thanks, Greg. As Greg mentioned, I'm going to cover some of the legislative and regulatory cyber-related activity at both the federal and state level. So first, federal cyber issues. In June of 2022, the Government Accountability Office, GAO, issued a report entitled Cyber Insurance: Action Needed to Assess Potential Federal Response to Catastrophic Attacks. The report identified several issues with the creation of a federal insurance cyber backstop similar to TRIA. The GAO ultimately recommended a full evaluation from the Federal Insurance Office, FIO, and the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, of whether a federal insurance response is warranted to address catastrophic cyber risks and financial exposure. In September of 2022, FIO issued a request for comment per the GAO's recommendation to evaluate the issue. FIO coordinated this effort with both CISA and the White House Office of the National Cyber Director, ONCD, of which public responses were due in November of 2022. A year later, in November of 2023, FIO, CISA, and the ONCD held an event with New York University's Volatility and Risk Institute to discuss their initial assessment of whether a federal insurance response is warranted to address catastrophic cyber incidents that pose risks to critical infrastructure. A notable development was an announcement that CISA will be reestablishing the Cybersecurity Insurance and Data Analysis Working Group to collaborate specifically on ransomware incidents. On November 20th of 2023, CISA announced they will be working with Stanford's Empirical Security Research Group to correlate data with cybersecurity controls to understand effectiveness. Outgoing Assistant Secretary for Financial Institutions, Graham Steele, provided closing remarks, stating further exploration is warranted. He also indicated that while they believe the insurance industry can absorb and continue to develop the market for attritional events, they believe the federal government could have a role for catastrophic events. Following the November 2023 FIO NYU conference on catastrophic cyber risk and a potential federal insurance response, the Federal Insurance Office held a conference of their own in May of 2024 to discuss potential forms of a federal insurance response to catastrophic cyber events. In addition to the May conference, FIO's Advisory Committee on Risk Sharing Mechanisms met on August 1st to hear a presentation on FIO's newly formed partnership with the National Science Foundation to establish a new industry university cooperative research center to improve the insurance sector's modeling and underwriting of terrorism and catastrophic cyber risks. Moving on to the NAIC Insurance Data Security Model Law, which has been around for quite a while. It was actually adopted back in 2017. To date, 26 states have enacted the NAIC Insurance Data Security Model Law. I won't read them out to you. They are listed on the slide here for your reference. The model establishes standards for data security and standards for the investigation of and notification to the Commissioner of Cybersecurity events. Most states have also added industry-friendly modifications. For example, this law supersedes all other requirements. We see in 2024, 3 states have enacted this legislation: Alaska, Oklahoma, and most recently Rhode Island, with legislation pending in Illinois and failed legislation in Missouri. We've also seen data breach legislation. All 50 states have some level of data breach notification requirements in their laws or regulations. Some of the newer legislation that we've seen includes notifying either the consumer or the Attorney General, and some states have additional statutory cybersecurity reporting requirements where incidents must also be reported to a central state agency. Some introduced legislation also allows for a private right of action in the event of a breach. And I will note that this particular provision was actually rejected during the drafting of the NAIC model law. We've seen 2 states enact legislation in 2024. Utah SB 98 addresses reporting responsibilities for cybersecurity breach notifications to the Utah Cyber Center. And Pennsylvania SB 824 amends several sections of the existing Breach of Personal Information Notification Act, including the definition of personal information, to limit medical information to that which is in the possession of a state agency or state agency contractor, and the requirements regarding the breach notification to the Attorney General. It also amends requirements regarding credit reporting and monitoring. Of note as well is legislation vetoed in 2024. Vermont HB 121 was vetoed by Governor Scott. This bill was heavily debated and the governor's veto was nearly overturned. It would have provided a framework for the establishment of notice requirements of a data broker security breach and require timely notice of personal data breaches to consumers and the Attorney General. A couple of miscellaneous items. Minnesota House Bill 5216 enacted the Public Agency Cybersecurity Incident Reporting System, which requires the Commissioner of Minnesota IT Services to establish a cyber incident reporting system having capability to facilitate the submission of timely, secure, and confidential cybersecurity incident notifications from public agencies, government contractors, and private entities. New Hampshire HB 1220 modifies the notice requirements from enacted SB 255 regarding sending privacy-related notifications to consumers. Controllers may make privacy notices available online or on an accompanying mobile application or device which the consumer regularly uses to interact with the controller. And Pennsylvania SB 824, which I mentioned on the previous slide, also falls into this category of notice requirements and incident reporting. Some legislation has also required companies to register as data brokers. Enacted New Jersey SB 2930 originally made substantial changes to access to public records in New Jersey, in particular for data brokers. The bill would have prohibited data brokers from getting personally identifiable information data from government sources, set up a data broker registry, created new requirements for commercial requests, and prohibited the resale of information gathered through public requests. Ultimately, though, this bill was extensively modified, and the final version of the bill ensures access to motor vehicle records by data brokers. And then a piece of introduced legislation, Alabama SB 213, addresses data broker responsibilities, including the requirements to develop, implement, and maintain a comprehensive information security program. And then just a note on data privacy. No discussion of cyber would be quite complete without data privacy. On the federal front, prior to the August recess, House Energy and Commerce Committee Chairwoman Kathy McMorris Rogers provided notice that the committee would hold a markup of the American Privacy Rights Act In an attempt to build support prior to the markup, McMorris Rodgers negotiated language with her Democratic colleagues. The negotiation actually failed to garner the necessary support, and due to issues within her conference, she was ultimately forced to cancel the markup just that morning. On the state front, overall, we're tracking more than 57 privacy-related bills. The California Consumer Privacy Act, or CCPA, remains the most extreme privacy legislation to date in the US. It does have some similarities to GDPR, including deletion of PII, transparency of use, contracts between businesses and service providers. We've also seen 20 states that have enacted CCPA style bills. I will note that we've included the year of enactment here in the slide, and note that the last couple of years, there's been an increase in enactments. In 2024, 7 states introduced extensive privacy legislation. These bills cover consumer access, deletion, correction, restriction, and portability of data, protection of PII, notification requirements, private right of action, and opt-out versus opt-in concepts. And with that brief overview, I will turn it back to Andy.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you to our speakers. If I sound like I'm reading pharmaceutical side effects here, I apologize. I just want to get through the last few things that are important. If we can advance, oh, here we are. Okay, so we're all friends here, right? You are the very first folks outside of Verisk to see the screen. This is our, well, it's not out yet, but it's our new Cyber Hub. It's going to be launched at core.verisk.com. So definitely check this out to see our hot topics and our latest projects and connect with the cyber team. The site's going to drop any day now, so check us out. Once it does, we'll try to announce it and let you know. If someone can take us to the next slide. We don't have time for Q&A, I'm sorry for that, so we're just gonna hit on these last couple of things here. You can continue the journey on cyber or so many of the other topics. We cover over 60 topics on our Emerging Issues website. I did want to announce we have our next webinar already lined up. Registration opens up soon. It's November 4th. It's on electric vehicles. It's going to be electrifying. Please join us. And last, we have a white paper. This is really cool, and I definitely wanted to hit on this. So you can see here, if you look at our white paper, that we're not just out there chasing butterflies. We are taking the lessons that we learn from our emerging issues research, and we're productizing, and we're building ISO solutions to address them. We even break this down by line of business so that you can really see how before they were ISO forms and rules and loss costs, they were emerging issues. Next slide, please. So these are just these next 3 slides that someone can just watch, pass us through here. Idea here is that we're providing you, we have a topic page for data breach and security. You can continue your journey there. Lots of articles that the emerging issues team has written, curated news feed. We update our website every day with new news feed items specific to the topics that are of most interest to you. And then as we move ahead here in the deck, we put all of the sources for the different categories of cyber that we discussed today. So you can see here, you know, our emerging issues team, our researchers, they've turned over a lot of stones to bring you today's insights. And finally, as we come up on the hour, if you missed me mentioning it the first few times, this is our website, core.verisk.com/EI for emerging issues. We've got a QR code up here for you, no logins, no passwords, no speed bumps. We invite you to jump into the deep end of our content and on cyber and all these other topics that we cover. And if you've joined any of our webinars before, you've heard me extol the virtues of our weekly newsletter. Sign up for that if you do nothing else. You'll get our insights to your inbox every Monday morning. So we really hope to get you all signed up for that. Finally, for Catherine, Kimberly, Kevin, Greg, and Laura, thank you for sharing your valuable time with us today. And please join us on November 4th when we go for a webinar ride in an EV. Until then, be well, everyone.